Okay, let's talk a little bit about physical dependence as an explanation for alcoholism. Okay, if you recall from our discussions in other chapters, when we talk about physical dependence, taking the drug and reducing the dose or discontinuation of the drug result in the appearance of physical withdrawal symptoms. Okay, so some people think that physical dependence should be one of the defining features of alcoholism. So in other words, they're saying that you don't classify a person as an alcoholic unless they present with physical dependence on the drug. Okay? But we know that there are lots and lots of cases where people consume very, very large amounts of alcohol, but do not seem to be physically dependent upon the alcohol. So there's some disagreement as to whether or not physical dependence should be the defining characteristic or defining feature of alcoholism as opposed to the level of drinking and some other very important characteristics. Okay. Of course, you probably already heard that some refer to alcoholism as a disease, and so they use the disease state as an explanation for alcoholism. There are some that believe that alcoholism is a genetic disease and that people are alcoholics from birth. Again, this is just the beliefs of some. Okay. Of course, we know that environment also plays a role, that a person could have a disposition for a disease, a disorder, but if the environmental conditions, etc., are not right, then that disease is not going to be expressed. Okay, so under this assumption, we assume that everyone starts off drinking similarly. Some people continue those drinking habits, just drinking moderately, social drinking here and there. And then you have some individuals that start drinking more heavily. Some of those individuals become problem drinkers. Some realize that it's a problem and they will stop drinking. Others will maintain those heavy drinking problems. And then you have what we call the gamma drinkers. Okay, and so you have drinking patterns that are characterized by those alcohol-related blackouts. Okay. So in terms of alcohol drinking, let's talk a little bit about how loss of control and priming contribute to alcohol drinking and alcoholism. Forgive me on this slide. I'll start with the priming first, actually. So when we talk about priming, we're talking about getting ready, setting something up, for something else to later happen. So when I explain this, I like to talk a bit in a similar fashion to how we use paint primers. That if we are about to paint a room a different color, we often will put on a coat of primer to get the wall ready to accept the color that we actually want to paint it. And so when we talk about priming, you're getting the individual ready to initiate or sustain continued drinking. So think of it this way. If you've ever been in a food court in the mall, they may give you a free sample of bourbon chicken, for example. That's one that kind of sticks out. And by giving you that free sample of the bourbon chicken, they're hoping that you will come over to their stand or to their store and buy your lunch there. They're priming you, setting you up to get ready to use. Okay, and so there's some theories that if you give an individual an alcoholic beverage, say a rum and Coke, that later, if they have a choice between a rum and Coke or just a Coke, that because they've had this priming experience, they may be more likely to choose the alcoholic beverage. And actually the jury's still out on that. There's some research that says they're more likely. There's some research that says the chances are still 50 to 50. But the idea behind priming is that it's setting up the conditions or getting an individual ready for future use. Okay? And then when we talk about loss control, this is more of an issue with someone who already has a problem with alcohol. And so when we talk about loss of control, consuming a single drink causes the drinking to spiral out of control. Okay, so it's like telling an alcoholic to have just one beer or to just have one shot of liquor. That would be very difficult. Okay, so the idea behind the loss of control is that a single drink would cause the individual's drinking to spiral out of control and lead to a second drink and a third drink and a fourth drink, etc., etc. Okay, so let's talk about how genetics can influence alcoholism and alcohol drinking. Okay, and so here we want to talk about what we call family, sorry, these are not coming in like I want them to. Talk about what we call family history positive. When we talk about a family history positive, this is just simply indicating that there is an alcoholic individual in your family. Okay, if there is an alcoholic individual in your family, you're said to have a family history positive. Okay? So when we consider the family history positive, we want to consider the level of genetic relatedness. What do I mean by the level of genetic relatedness? You are more closely related to your mother or your father than you are to your grandmother or your grandfather or your aunt or your uncle or your cousins. Okay? And so the more closely related the alcoholic is to you, the more similar your drinking patterns will be to that individual. So your drinking patterns would be more similar to an alcoholic mother or father than they would an alcoholic aunt or uncle. Okay? So again, the more closely related the alcoholic individual is to you, if you have a family history positive, then the more similar your drinking patterns will be to that individual. Okay? And in terms of the risk of becoming an alcoholic, if there's a family history positive, then of course there's an increased risk of becoming an alcoholic. And then of course the more closely related the individual, the greater the risk. Okay, and so that risk can be increased as much as 5 to 6 times over a person that has who does not have a family history positive. Okay, now I have this asterisk here that says interaction with environment. You could have a family history positive, okay, for alcoholism. That does not mean that the individual is predestined to become an alcoholic, because you could have a person who has observed the effects that alcohol has had on their relatives, and that person could decide that they're not going to drink. Okay, so just because there's a family history positive does not mean that you're predestined to be an alcoholic. It just means that your risks are increased because there are probably some genetic factors that influence how you respond to alcohol. Okay, now when we talk about this idea of genetics and genetics influencing alcohol, okay, we know that alcoholism can, what we call, run in families, that there's some genetic influences on the trait, but we have not identified the specific genes that are involved in it. There's not a single gene that we can point out to say that having this gene or this variation of this gene means that you're going to be an alcoholic. We just know that genetic factors do influence the risk. Okay? Although we can't identify the exact genes, we do know that genetics can influence the risk of alcoholism by affecting body chemistry, brain function, personality. Why? Because your genes code for the proteins that make up you. Your genes code for the proteins and all of the things that make you who you are. Your genes code for the proteins and all those things that set up your body chemistry. Your genes code for the proteins that make up the receptors that the neurotransmitters in your brains are binding to, etc. So your genes make you who you are. Your genes set up the levels of neurotransmitters in your brain and influence your personality. Okay? But we recognize that things happen in interaction with the environment. Okay? I'm not going to talk a whole lot about withdrawal from alcohol, other than to say that it occurs, in two stages: the early minor syndrome, which is usually over within 48 hours, or what we call a late major syndrome, which is characterized by delirium tremens, etc. And so, in that phase of withdrawal, the individual could have hallucinations and other things. The thing I think for us that's more important about withdrawal from alcohol to understand is that the withdrawal from alcohol is very dangerous. A lot of people don't realize that alcohol is one of the most dangerous drugs of abuse because of the levels of alcohol that individuals use. I don't think we've talked about it yet, but alcohol has one of the lower therapeutic indices of drugs of abuse, but the rebound excitation that happens in the brain during the withdrawal from alcohol could lead to life-threatening seizures. And so alcohol withdrawal can be very, very dangerous, particularly in the extremely heavy drinker. And this is why it's often recommended that if at all possible that alcohol withdrawal occur in a medical setting, so that the individual could be monitored and necessary interventions could happen if they're at risk for seizures and some of the other significant problems. So I'm not going to really ask you a lot about withdrawal per se, but just understand that with alcohol, it's a big deal and it could be dangerous. Remember that wedge in chapter 3 where we showed that that withdrawal symptoms can be barely noticeable up to those that produce death. Alcohol is on that thicker end of the wedge where the withdrawal symptoms could be deadly. Okay? The unfortunate thing is this late major syndrome phase could last anywhere from 7 to 10 days. Okay? Now, this is talking a little bit about acute alcohol administration. What do we mean by that? We're saying that there's some very dangerous things that can happen even if the individual has only had a limited exposure to alcohol. The first being alcohol poisoning, or the lethality of a single dose. So if the individual consumes a single large enough dose of alcohol, that could result in alcohol poisoning, could lead to death. Okay? My freshman year of college, a young man drank himself to death. Single setting, sat and drank probably about a fifth of liquor. That's an unfortunate thing. Folks are away from home for the very first time, often partaking of drugs like alcohol for the very first time, and honestly quite unaware of how dangerous these things are. So he consumed a large amount of alcohol. His friends assumed they'd let him sleep it off. But one of the things that we'll see in it, because of how alcohol does what it does by increasing GABA, remember that major inhibitory neurotransmitter, increasing GABA transmission, and GABA is associated with the chloride ion channel, which hyperpolarizes cells, makes them harder to excite, and so it essentially ends up shutting down the central nervous system. So respiration stops, all the autonomic functions stop. The individual ceases breathing. And so a lot of people have the misconceptions that when people overdose or that when people die from alcohol consumption, it's because they aspirated their vomit. Oftentimes it's because they've asphyxiated, because the autonomic centers in their brains that control breathing have been shut down, because at those very high doses, alcohol has those sedative effects. It has those central nervous system depressant effects and ends up shutting off the autonomic centers in the brain, and more importantly, the ones that control breathing. So a single large enough dose could result in death. Okay, so I've already talked about the risk of the respiratory failure. And, a lot of people don't know that alcohol has a very low therapeutic index of 3.5. Okay, so some of the examples that I give, when I talk about therapeutic indices in chapter 1, I give them just for ease of, dividing numbers, dividing an LD50 by an ED50. But a lot of the drugs that people encounter typically will have therapeutic indices that are much, much higher than 3.5. And so when you consider college students and the binge drinking that often happens on the weekend, the amounts that people consume in these settings is extremely dangerous, okay? So one of the things that we really probably have not talked a lot about yet when we talk about things like tolerance, increased ability to metabolize a drug, and we talk about tolerance developing to the effects of a drug and not the drug itself. And so for some drugs, you can have tolerance developing to some of the lethal effects that are associated with the drug. Okay, and then remember earlier we talked about the MEOS system kicking in and helping to metabolize alcohol when the individual has these extremely high doses. And so there are some mechanisms that are in place that probably prevent some individuals from overdosing, but it's very, very dangerous when people go out on the weekends and participate in these binge drinking bouts. Okay, hangover is something else that's associated with acute alcohol administration. It's considered a mini withdrawal from alcohol. The hangover, characterized by headache. Some of that is related to the rebound excitation in the brain. Some of that headache is related to the fact that alcohol has disrupted water balances. Some individuals could be dehydrated. The alcohol has also interfered with blood sugar levels, and all those things result in the headache that the individual experiences. Also disruptions of circadian rhythms, so it disrupts your sleep cycles. So even if an individual passes out after a drinking bout, they're not getting a restful sleep, and so they could be passed out for 6 or 8 hours and wake up dog tired, okay, because the brain is not going to spend the appropriate amount of time in REM sleep. Okay, so your sleep cycles, your circadian rhythms are going to be disrupted. That's also going to give you a headache. Now, it is true that some of the hangover symptoms can be delayed if the person drinks a little bit. But the point is that you're either going to have to continue drinking to avoid the hangover, which is going to cause significant problems, or you're going to have to go ahead and experience the withdrawal. Okay. And then associated with acute alcohol administration, those alcohol-induced behaviors. And so we talked about disinhibition, folks doing things they wouldn't ordinarily do under the influence of alcohol. We've talked about the effects on peripheral vision. We've talked about reaction time, hand-eye coordination, impairment of the senses, vision, pain, taste, smell, all of those things. The effects on memory, the alcohol-related blackouts and grayouts. And then, of course, the effects on motor coordination and driving and so forth. Okay? Alcohol can also affect reproduction. There are a couple of ways it affects reproduction. Acute alcohol can increase sexual interest and risky behaviors. Okay. Now, what do we mean by that? When a person is intoxicated, okay, they may be more likely to participate in sexual behaviors that they would not, or they make poor decisions. For example, maybe participating in sexual activity with someone that they don't know well, or making the decision not to use a condom, and so they put themselves at increased risk because their decision making, is impaired by the alcohol. Okay. So you could also have increased sexual arousal with the acute alcohol. Okay, problems generally occur with the higher levels of alcohol. So in terms of the higher level of alcohol, you could have a male, for example, that has increased sexual interest but may not have the ability to maintain an erection or ejaculate because of the high levels of alcohol. Okay. One of the other things that we do know is that binge drinking in particular could result in shrinking testicles. So there's some evidence that continued alcohol use could decrease testicular size in males. Okay, so plenty of things that can happen as a result of alcohol exposure. Okay, now there are a few benefits of moderate alcohol consumption. Excuse me. Most of these have been reported in the elderly, but some of them can be extended across populations. So low or moderate levels of alcohol could help some individuals get to sleep. Sometimes people who have problems sleeping, the doctor may say, well, have a glass of wine or just have a small drink before you go to bed. Alcohol also can increase morale, increase the likelihood to participate in activities. So I think in one of the other lectures, I referred to alcohol as liquid courage. And so people are just more likely to interact with other people, to participate in activities in social settings where they may not necessarily know people. So just overall increase in morale, more likely to participate in activities. Okay. Alcohol can also, low levels of alcohol can also alleviate some symptoms of depression. But let me be clear here when we talk about may have the ability to alleviate some symptoms of depression. Here we are talking about situational depression. So you had a bad day. You decide to have a drink because you had a bad day. Alcohol is not going to be useful in terms of improving the symptoms of clinical depression. But if we're talking about situational depression, or the downs that people feel, from day to day, then a small amount of alcohol may have, that euphoria that's associated with low doses of alcohol may have some benefits. But one of the things that we do have to caution, because of what alcohol does in terms of increasing GABA transmission, which is the major inhibitory neurotransmitter, alcohol can worsen the symptoms of clinical depression. And in individuals who are not already depressed, if you have someone who is chronically drinking, or let me use the word over an extended period of time, drinking very large amounts of alcohol, then that could result in symptoms that are very similar, if not identical, to chemical depression or clinical depression, because after that long-term heavy drinking, they have essentially changed the chemical environment in their brain by increasing to such a great extent the levels of those inhibitory neurotransmitters, and so essentially they create a depressed brain through heavy drinking. Okay. There is evidence that low to moderate amounts of alcohol have benefits to cardiac health, thinking that alcohol can prevent buildup of plaque in the arteries and so forth. And so there used to be campaigns around for a glass of red wine a day. Okay, now research shows that those cardiac benefits can extend beyond just red wine, so it's not just red wines that could have some benefits for cardiac health. The other interesting thing that so far has only been shown in males is that a beer a day can reduce cholesterol levels or keep those cholesterol levels under control in males. So far, there's no evidence that the same thing happens in women, but there seem to be some benefits in terms of keeping the cholesterol levels in check if a male drinks a beer a day. Okay. Now, this slide, you're not going to have any, exam questions on this, but this is just something to show you the impact of chronic alcohol consumption on nearly every system in the body. So at your leisure, you can, go back over this slide and just look at it from the brain down to the sexual organs, that there's really no system that's left unchanged by the effects of chronic alcohol consumption. And the interesting but troubling thing as well is that even if we account for differences in body weight, even if we account for the amount of alcohol that's consumed, it appears that females still suffer disproportionately from the harmful effects of alcohol consumption in comparison to males. Okay? Now, the last thing that we want to talk about relative to alcohol is alcohol and behavioral economics. Okay? So remember, when we talk about behavioral economics, we're talking about what happens to demand for the drug or the use of the drug and the cost goes up. So how does cost of alcohol affect consumption? How does increase in the work or the effort that you have to do to get the alcohol affects in consumption? And what about the type of beverage that we're talking about? So we're going to give a very general answer for that, okay? Is that, it really depends, okay? It depends whether the demand is going, to follow the characteristics of inelastic or elastic. Depends on the type of alcohol that's being consumed, and it depends on the country that you're talking about. So, for example, if we were talking about wine, where it's more part of the everyday culture in Europe, then that's going to be very different than if we were talking about increased cost of wine here in the U.S. Okay? What we do know is that the more alcohol costs, and the harder it is to get, that's generally going to decrease consumption. But we also know that we have to take into consideration the type of alcohol beverage and the country that we're actually talking about. Okay? And that's it for alcohol.